What made you develop the slingshot, and what like catapulted your business like that now? Because everybody knows primarily what slingshot is and what they do and what helps. How did you come about like getting that going?
It all just came from like an interest. I was just really, really interested in lifting.
Mm-hmm.
I loved it, and I'm a little bit maybe like Rain Man when it comes to like powerlifting equipment and powerlifting gear. And I used to mess around with different bench shirts and squat suits and knee wraps and wrist wraps and things like that. And I would sit there and kind of think about like, oh, I wonder if I wrap my knees like this, what it would do. Or I used to wonder a ton about different training protocols and training programs. Like, Louis Simmons talks a lot about like dynamic effort work and speed work, but I'm like, well, what if you train really slow? Like, what are the effects of that?
Mm-hmm.
What if you try to intentionally, have a 6 or 8 second, lowering phase of a squat? And what if you tried, bands and chains and weight releasers? And like, I was always very fascinated by that. And a lot of that was kicked off by Louis Simmons and a lot of his principles, the conjugate system. Changing up exercises fits my personality type really, really well, because I like you said, it's like you want to have multiple things going on at the same time, and the conjugate system is perfect for that. Like it's like somebody who has workout ADHD, it's like your ADHD workout wet dream, right?
Yeah.
An amazing protocol. But yeah, training has just always been on the front of my mind, and how to get better at it, how to solve problems for it. So there was a period of time where I was powerlifting, and I was gaining quite a bit of strength. I think at the time I was squatting around 800-900 pounds, somewhere in that range.
Yeah.
And I was starting to put up some numbers in the bench as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember like getting around older people, and they would say, "Oh man, I remember when I used to do that." And they'd say like, "I remember when I used to bench, 400 pounds or 300 pounds or whatever it might be." And I was always like, I don't understand, because I was like early 30s probably or so. And I was like, I don't understand why they say they used to do it. Like, well, how come they don't still do it? Like, lifting is so much fun. Like, I'm going to lift my whole life, But then as I got a little older and started running into some injuries and just started to push the envelope with bigger benches all the time and stuff like that, I tore my pec. And once I tore my pec, then when I started to gain strength again, it was different. I just wasn't the same. My explosiveness wasn't the same. Yeah. And then I started kind of thinking, oh shit, now I'm kind of like those old dudes at the gym who used to say, oh, I used to do this, I used to do that. And I was still able to gain back a lot of strength because I didn't have like a full like rupture or anything like that. But then, it happened again, and my elbow was hurting and a bunch of things were going on. So I just, one day I was with my dad, and I was telling him about this idea. I had the idea for a while before I really acted on it. And I'm explaining to my dad. My dad's not understanding what I'm talking about. And so I grabbed some wrist wraps from the trunk of my car, and I'm like, well, I think this thing would work like this. You'd like wrap, one arm this way and one arm that way, and then you'd Velcro it in the middle. And I was like, hold on to the middle. I'm going to, pull this thing back and see what happens. So I pulled it back, and the Velcro snaps and it hits him in the. He's like, well, I don't think that's a very good product. I was like, actually, no, that's it. Like that's the way it's supposed to feel. Cause it would spot your elbows the way that somebody would assist your elbows on like incline dumbbell bench press or something like that. And so I was trying to think of a bunch of different ways to make that happen. I bought a really tight Under Armour shirt at the time. And, before you put your shirt on all the way, if you put it up over both arms before you put it up over your head, it is across your chest. And so I tried to bench press with an Under Armour shirt that way. That was like, like a kid's medium or something, it was like really tiny. But it didn't work. It kind of worked. Like, I think it gave me like a little bit of extra strength, but it hurt. And it was just like weird. And just, so I was like, I don't know if that's like the right design, but I think I'm on something. I think if I could make it out of that wrist wrap material, I think that would be, that would be a good way to go. So I was trying to figure it out for weeks on end, and I couldn't really come up with anything. And then I was talking to my wife, and I said, I think was like, I think I got it now. I think all I need to do is take basically 2 knee wraps and sew them together. I think if they were sewed together, then they could, you have a hole, you know, for your arms and stuff like that. And so I was like, do you know how to sew like that? She's like, no, I don't have any idea how to sew something like that. She's like, but my friend at swimming, she makes swimsuits for the swim team. Okay. Like, I bet you she would be able to, you know, do something like that. She's got a pretty good machine and stuff like that. And so I met with her at a Starbucks, and there was a Starbucks that was right next to a Fitness 19 in Woodland, California. And I met her, we went over the designs, and then I met her again the following week, and she came back with, which is now like a slingshot. And I said, hey, stay right here for a second. I said, I'm going to go run into that gym. I went to that gym. I just have my flip flops on, and you know, I pretend like I own the place. That's the way to always get into a gym for free. Yeah. And I just kind of like, you know, go flying through there. I lay down on the bench, and I bench 135 for a couple reps. I'm like, oh my God, that felt amazing. So then I went to 225, and I do 225 for like 10 reps, and the weights are just bouncing off my chest. I'm like, holy shit, you know, this is it. And I got up off the bench, and I just was covered in goosebumps head to toe. I was like, wow. This is it. This is like my lottery ticket. Now I need to figure out like what to do with this damn thing. So it's crazy. Went back to that woman, and I said, hey, I need a couple different sizes of these, because I need to test them in my gym and make sure that people aren't going to die when they try to use it. and from there, it was like, you know, some of the ways that some of these things came to be they're just so simple. And so this might be a good lesson for a lot of people listening, is like, it doesn't have to be complicated for it to be effective. And so you know, this is a very like an American story, I think, because like I'm sitting inside of a Starbucks, you know, using their Wi-Fi on an iPad, and I type in, you know, the Google search. So I mean, everyone has access to all these things. Everyone has an iPhone, right? Everyone has Google, you know. So I'm sitting inside. Everyone has a Starbucks in their neighborhood. I'm sitting at a Starbucks, and I Google knee wrap manufacturers, and I look it up. I look into it. I find a source. I get some slingshots made. Those didn't work out very good. Like they were red, which is, I wanted them to be red so that people would see them from across the gym, and it'd be very obvious that you were like wearing like a device. If it was black, powerlifters are fat and they all wear black. So I knew that if it was black, it would be kind of camouflaged by that. So anyway, the first batch of slingshots that I made turned people red, because when you would sweat into them, the dye would come off, and they just weren't designed well. They weren't strong enough and stuff. So I had to go back to the drawing board one extra time. I found another manufacturer, and I was off to the races. So there was nothing like, you know, I think people, they make everything like so dramatic all the time that everything's going to be so freaking like difficult. And those times were difficult for me just because I was broke. I just didn't have money. I had shitty cars, and they would break down all the time. And it wasn't a very convenient way of living for me at that time. But when I look back at it and think about the progression of like just sitting at a Starbucks, Googling it, having it like be messed up one time, like, which was super frustrating at the time, because I spent $800 that I didn't have. But in retrospect, and then listening to other business owners, like $800, and to lose $800 in the business world, you know, it's not much of a sacrifice. And then it wasn't really a loss. It was a learning lesson. It was an opportunity to learn, you know, more on how I can make the product better. But